Councillor Declan Meenagh's motion is the next motion on the floor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And well, I didn't think we'd get to this motion, but I'm so glad that I submitted it. When we see the appalling situation in Palestine, and I think that this motion recognises the apartheid state that Israel is forcing on the Palestinians, and it's very hard when we have so much violence, but I think we need to look at our own island. And I think we need to ask ourselves what helped and what didn't in our own conflict, because everyone's trying to say that the Irish conflict, there's lessons to be learned. They're very different. And for me, the reason, there's lots of reasons it's different, but more democracy helped. More violence didn't help. And the collective punishment of the people in Gaza, the way that people in Gaza were being treated before this and are being treated now, before it was difficult. Now, I don't know what's going to be left because it's so awful, but I think it is appropriate that we recognise it as an apartheid state, and that to get out of this horrendous situation, I don't have an answer. I just think that, more democracy, more peace is how we do it. And I think that recognising the way that Palestine's been treated is a really important first step. This motion, I don't know if Amnesty International are still pressing it. They haven't asked me to withdraw it, but I still think that recognising the fact that, people in Gaza are being blocked from at every opportunity, that there were settler-only modes of transport, that, they're just completely discriminated against. So I'm asking that Dublin City Council would recognise it as an apartheid situation. Thank you.
Councillor McDonagh.
Gormagat Ardver agus Boilum Taku Leshan Councillor Meenagh agus Leshan Runeshaw. I want to fully support this motion, and it is very significant. If you look on the date, April 2023, so the recent horrendous deterioration of the crisis in Palestine is no coincidence. It didn't start on the 7th of October. The attack by Hamas, of course, was horrendous and to be condemned. The targeting of innocent civilians by any side is to be condemned. But the context of this is indeed apartheid. There is no question that the Israeli regime has no interest in a two-state solution. They are grabbing Palestinian land left, right and centre for years now to make a two-state solution impossible. And we see what amounts to, and I don't think it's any exaggeration, acts of not only inhumanity, a breach of international law, but actual genocide against the Palestinian people, the bombardment of Gaza, innocent men, women and children being slaughtered. This is absolutely horrendous. And the context is of years, not just a month.
Thank you, Lord. I'd like to support this motion and thank Councillor Declan Meenagh for putting it forward. I read a harrowing report today from somebody in Amnesty on the ground there, and we forget that the NGOs are still over there, and they're also losing their homes. They're probably the only ones that are getting the reports back to us as to what's happening. This particular person had lost their home. They couldn't wash. There was like 7 hours queuing up for bread over there at the moment. And it's just horrific what's happening over there. And, it's people working for Amnesty that are, giving us the reports back and giving us the news back, what's happening. And I'd like to support this motion. And there's nothing more I can say. Every single right you have, a right to life, a right to food, a right to shelter, it's been taken away, a right to water.
Councillor John Lyons.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I'd like to formally second the motion, if I may, fully support it. I think the Amnesty report followed on from reports from B'Tselem, a human rights organisation in Israel, and Al-Haq, a Palestinian human rights organisation, which conclusively found that Israel does practice a system of apartheid. It's a cruel, inhumane system. Through their laws, policies and practices ensure that the Palestinian people of the West Bank, Gaza, those Palestinian citizens of Israel and those Palestinians in exile, the Palestinian diaspora, are left hopeless. And I think the context in which the 7th of October incursion by the Hamas military wing, it's as if history didn't happen, as if it came from nowhere. 75 years since the ethnic cleansing of 750,000 Palestinians, indigenous Palestinians from their homeland, over 50 years of an illegal occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, 16 years of which in Gaza has also had a horrendous siege. They control the air, they control the land, they control the sea. Palestinian people, children, women and men who live in Gaza are imprisoned in a tiny strip of land. When you leave people, and the Oslo Accords have shown conclusively to have failed from a Palestinian point of view, but from an Israeli point of view, with over 700 settlers in the West Bank, it's actually been successful for them. You leave no other options for people. Desperate things are going to happen, and Israel paid a price, a heavy price. And I think the way forward is for us not only to talk about things, but to actually take action. Chair.
Councillor Dahi Doolan. I want to commend Councillor Meenagh for putting forward this motion. I think and Amnesty International, this is a well-researched report. I've met with Amnesty and Al-Haq to discuss this report, and it's not simply an emotive report, it's well-researched. And I think the core of what we see happening in front of our eyes in Gaza and West Bank and across Palestine, on our TV sets, on our phones, it's genocide in real time. And that's what makes this even more infuriating, frustrating, upsetting and heartbreaking. We are witnessing it. We're not hearing it after the event, we're seeing it in real time. And the core of all this, the current genocide, the core of it is the 75 years ago, the Nakba, that forced people off their land and then allowed Israel, with the full support of the US, to implement absolute apartheid. And people need to remember, it is illegal, it is against international law to support, collude, or apartheid. It is now illegal, just as it should have been under, when it was a white minority rule in South Africa, it should have been illegal, but since then we have learned, but unfortunately we're seeing it being absolutely weaponized and terrorizing the people of Palestine. And I think us taking a position here today, endorsing this motion, I would ask Lord Mayor, if you would, to contact both the Palestinian and the Israeli embassies, and I hope this is passed unanimously, and that they send a copy of this motion with our full support. Many thanks, and thanks to Councillor Meenagh, and I look forward to people joining us on November the 29th in the Richard O'Carroll room for when we're going to mark the United Nations International Day of Solidarity with Palestine. Look forward to seeing you all there.
Thanks, Dahi. Councillor Catherine Stocker.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Meenagh for putting this motion forward. Obviously, the motion predates the current eruption of this conflict, and I'll begin by saying, obviously, we all in this chamber would condemn the killing of civilians on any side, and you know, that is unacceptable. But you know, apartheid fundamentally does not accord full and equal rights to all peoples. And without question, that is and has been true of the treatment of the people of Palestine under the Israeli administration. And I suppose what the people of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank have been living with for far too long merits the full-throated condemnation of the international community, and unfortunately has not received the full-throated condemnation of the international community. So I think it is important we name an injustice as what it is, and in this case that is an apartheid regime. And so we support Councillor Meenagh's motion on the Amnesty International report. Thank you.
Gurv Magath Catherine. Councillor Hazel Chew.
Thank you, Operator. I think Councillor Land said that B'Tselem, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch have all rightly called this apartheid. The number of illegal settlements continue to grow and has been growing faster. The impunity of settlers in carrying out harassment attacks on Palestinians had led to such attacks becoming more overt and widespread. Through the violence used to maintain their occupation and the cruelty it doles out to Palestinians every day, Israel is wildly in breach of international law, yet we do nothing to respond or punish such behaviour. As such, we have ultimately allowed this situation to continue and to get worse. We see forced displacements, demolitions, forced transfers, permit systems, the apartheid system, indiscriminate killing and arrest and imprisonment without trial, and the list goes on. So I myself, and I know many of my colleagues, are fully supportive of Councillor Meenagh's motion. But I do hope, to Councillor Doolan's point, we can send this to both ambassadors, but that we stand strong on this issue and we continue to call this what it is. It is a genocide happening in real time. Thank you.
Good morning, Hazel. Councillor Pat Dunn.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and fully support Councillor Meenagh's motion. And I think it's very important for those that might be listening to this debate outside the chamber to note that this motion was submitted on the 28th of April, many months before the current escalation of the conflict in Palestine. Because Israel's apartheid system is so similar to the apartheid system that we had seen in South Africa. And we as Irish people, and indeed the Irish Trade Union movement and Dunstore's workers over the years, highlighted these issues here in Dublin. And that formed part of a great movement that defeated apartheid in South Africa. And I think our support of a motion like this in supporting Amnesty International sends a message both to the Israeli regime and to the Palestinian people that they're not alone, that we as a non-colonial nation support their cause and support the fact that they have been treated in such a manner in an apartheid state, and that state was in their own land. And the last thing I just want to say on it, Lord Mayor, I, like other councillors, received an email from the Israeli ambassador, and there's one sentence in it that completely appalls me when they say that we warned the Palestinian people to move out of the territory that we're now destroying.
Councillor Kieran Perry.
Thanks, Lord Vera. Just to commend Councillor Meenagh for the motion, and I fully support it. As the previous speakers have already said, very timely given the continuing slaughter of civilians in Gaza. And as has been said already, given that this motion predates the current terror being inflicted on the population in Gaza, this conflict didn't begin on the 7th of October, and targeting of civilians is unacceptable and must be condemned regardless of who carries out the action. Let's be clear on that. But when you have an organisation, a respected organisation such as Amnesty, describing the Israeli state as an apartheid state, that should tell us everything we need to know. At the moment, we have the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and many humanitarian relief agencies condemning the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. I think it's time for the political class and those of us in this chamber here to make it clear of which side we're on, and we do have to pick sides. So I fully support Councillor Meeha's motion.
Councillor Damien O'Farrell.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just want to support Councillor Meenagh's motion. It was very opportune, and it was good, as he said himself, that he put it on. There's a word that's been mentioned tonight, genocide, and I think that's where we are now. There's no sugarcoating. This is genocide. It happened in Rwanda. It happened in other times. We thought that we'd see the end of that, you know, but it's genocide and action, dialogue. The time for dialogue is countries. We need to take action. Action needs to be taken against Israel and countries. The UN. They need to be more forceful. Into sporting bodies, everybody in the world used to unite to take more action. It's not acceptable, and I think that is the word to use: genocide. And again, thanks Councillor Meenagh for his motion tonight, which I fully support.
Councillor Mannix Flynn.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you very much, Declan, for this splendid motion. This is a reminder of Guernica. This is a reminder of Blitzkrieg, and this is a reminder of Operation Barbarossa. There isn't any difference between what is happening in Gaza and the attack and the bombardment and there was in those historic, horrendous, attacks on civilians, indiscriminate attacks. What comes to mind, Lord Mayor, is the great poet and playwright Sean O'Casey, who in Juno and the Paycock when the son gets shot and his mother addresses the crowd and the audience and says, "Take away these hearts of stone and give us hearts of flesh." What we need here are hearts of flesh, because this is inhumane, it's inhumanity, and there's simply no justification for it whatsoever. No to war, no to this particular slaughter from anybody. And that includes all those organisations who would take life wantonly. But in this instance, here's a state supported by the United States of America, who are allies and friends of ours, who are supporting this genocide, and we cannot exclude America. So this motion must address what America is doing, because they are supplying the armaments to conduct this barbaric act that can only be associated with what happened in the Second World War, Blitzkrieg, and indeed Operation Barbarossa, which is a complete wipeout of the Russian people. Thank you.
Councillor Christy Burke.
Thanks, Lord Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Meenagh for the motion. And as Pat Dunn said there, this motion's going back to last April. And Mannix has mentioned it and many others have mentioned it. Genocide definitely at its best. Genocide, and that's what it is. And when the world heard an Israeli minister yesterday say, drop an atom bomb on Gaza, they can either go and live in the desert or to Ireland. And all he got was a suspension. He should have been arrested and jailed for incitement to kill. And that's the mindset that we're dealing with. Could I also ask, Lord Mayor, that the US ambassador to Dublin should be also included in a letter from your office to meet representatives of the main groups here, to put pressure on Joe Biden to stop standing shoulder to shoulder. The British Prime Minister, the same. Senior figures in the EU, the same. Rubbing shoulders. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the political leaders of the world were out of the traps, rightly so, condemning the Russian military and the Russian administration. In this particular incident, for many years now, there are not many world leaders coming out to support the people of Gaza. Up to tonight, Lord Mayor, over 10,000 lives lost. An immediate ceasefire without preconditions and the release of the hostages is what's required. And at the end of the day, everyone will sit around the table and try and hope their best to find a new journey for the resolution.
Councillor Kevin Donoghue.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Just to put on record, my thanks to Declan Meenagh for submitting the motion, and that I obviously fully support the motion in myself, in part for obviously what it says, the contents of the report. I agree with the suggestions that it should be sent on to the various embassies that were recommended, but in part because the international community has failed the Palestinian people repeatedly for decades. We have allowed and watched on as international law was broken, as people were slaughtered, and time again, the international community, I feel, has let the Palestinian people down. I think this is an opportunity, someone else mentioned it, to indicate to the Palestinian people that they are not alone. And I think that's important. I think it is important to show solidarity. And I think that if the international community had been doing what it was supposed to be doing for the last 30, 40, 50 years, then we may not be where we are. But that is, all that being the case, I support the motion as it is today. I hope people will support the motion that comes up later on this as well. And thanks for your time, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Ray McAdam.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I support the motion. If you look at the report, it actually states that Israel's apartheid system against Palestinians is a cruel system of domination and a crime against humanity. And over the last period of time, the Irish government has sought to see change happen on the ground. Indeed, when we served on the UN Security Council, we expressed in the strongest possible terms the unequal treatment of Palestinians in Israel and in the occupied territories. And we were particularly proactive in highlighting the situation on the ground. And indeed, we supported the UN resolution from the General Assembly that sought the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on issues arising from Israel's continuing occupation of the Palestinian territory. I think the words of the Taoiseach over the last number of weeks, he has judged the mood of the people of this country right. And I believe that he speaks for all of us when he says that what is happening on the ground is approaching revenge, and that there needs to be an immediate ceasefire as to what is happening currently in Gaza. I support the motion. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Deirdre Heaney.
Yeah, Lord Mayor, I know there's a couple of motions coming up later on, but just on behalf of the Fianna Fáil group, I want to join with the other members of this chamber who have condemned what is happening to innocent men, women and children in Gaza being bombed constantly. I'm going to share my thoughts on it in a few minutes, but it's just absolutely unacceptable what is happening to the people in Gaza, Lord Mayor, and my party agrees with what has been said in relation to bombing of innocent men, women and children. Gurmagat, Lord Mayor.
Gurmagat. Councillor Anne Feeney.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I respect the Amnesty International report. I completely and unequivocally condemn the massacre, and kidnapping of Israeli civilians by Hamas on the 7th of October. And I also completely condemn the killing, bombardment and collective punishment of civilians in Gaza by the Israeli IDF and government. I support the Taoiseach Taoiseach EU and UN Secretary General calling for a ceasefire, or whatever anyone likes to call that, to allow humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza and to provide space for peace brokers to start to find a way out of this terrible war and hostages, young and old, to be returned to their families. This war, like the war in Ukraine, is not only horrendous in scale and human misery, but has the potential to escalate and cause greater division and hate around the world, far beyond Israel and Palestine. And this, I think, none of us want. For that reason, I'd be careful about some of the terminology used, like genocide. I think Ireland has a huge role to play as a peace broker. We have a history of it, and I think we could play that role, but we need to be careful about some of the wording we use, while at the same time not being afraid to condemn what is entirely wrong. The war has to stop and diplomacy must prevail for the sake of Israeli hostages, for the people of the Gaza and West Bank, and for the dream of peaceful living, justice and equality for all in the region. Thank you.
And Councillor Maura Devine, please.
I think this hell, this genocide, because that is what it is, and I'm not afraid to say that, and I don't think it belittles what people say, and I don't think it puts people in extra danger of not being able to break peace, but it is genocide. It is the indiscriminate slaughter and the annihilation sought. The guy, the ambassador who's suspended, he suggested perhaps, the dropping of a nuclear bomb on Gaza, which is the size of Louth. We cannot stand idly by. And as one of the displaced persons prior to the bombing of Gaza was being displaced from the West Bank by settlers, said, the world must stop spoiling Israel. And I think we're well on that way here. And I just hope this council, this city, stand up, and they will, because the protests, the rallies, the silence, the sombre, the absolute respectfulness that people have felt while waving their flags, it was really important, and it's important to the Palestinian people. Gurmagat.
Councillor Meenagh, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for the support. Obviously, this was submitted in a different time, but, we call it apartheid because we hope it can change. And we look back at where we were on this island, and people thought there'd never be peace, and we're there. And I think we can serve as an example, but I think that we start by labelling it and saying what it is, by supporting this, well-written, well-researched report. And I think that calling it apartheid is a good first start. So I commend the motion, and I thank you all for your comments.
Is that agreed? Agreed.